You're watching another edition of News in Depth here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. Donald Trump has reignited calls for U.S. control of Greenland, citing national security and Arctic interests. The proposal has drawn sharp rebukes from Copenhagen and Nuuk, raising questions about sovereignty, strategy, and alliances. Joining us today on TVP World to unpack the stakes is Marcin Zaborowski, Europe editor at TVP World. Hello and welcome to News in Depth.
Thank you for having me.
So we're looking at Donald Trump's renewed interest in Greenland, and my question would be, what do you think is the real objective behind it? Are we talking about missile defense, Arctic basing, critical minerals, or is it more of a leverage against his allies?
It's all of those things. I mean, when you look into the map, you actually see that Greenland is much closer to the United States than it is to Europe. And it's much closer to the United States than it is to its colonial master, meaning Denmark. So you can imagine that if you had hostile intentions towards the United States, placing rocket launchers in Greenland would represent a direct threat to the United States. Of course, this is not going to happen when the island is being managed or ruled by Denmark, because Denmark is an ally of the United States. But the United States is concerned, as it was during the Second World War, by the way. During the Second World War, the United States was almost obsessed about the fact that a potential invasion of the United States could take place from the territory of Greenland, should Greenland be controlled by the Nazis. And United States had a deal with the Danish government under occupation, whereby the Danish government agreed to the United States temporary management of occupation of Greenland during the Second World War. So during the Second World War, the island was managed by the United States.
Right, and recently we saw, of course, the United States' move on Nicolas Maduro and Venezuela. Do you think that also signifies the Washington administration's motivation to kind of expand its sphere of influence, or at least solidify it?
Well, the whole discussion now about Greenland, which you mentioned, is renewed. And is renewed in the context of the U.S. operation in Venezuela, which of course has been successful, and it also follows on the back of the publication of the National Security Strategy, where the United States very explicitly said that we are back to the so-called Monroe Doctrine, whereby the United States would protect and also expand its influence to the Western Hemisphere, which means the concentration on the Western Hemisphere. Normally that would mean Latin America, but if you want to be very expansionist, you could also look up north and say the Western Hemisphere also concerns and it might expand to Greenland. So the whole discussion appeared in the context of the conversation with the State Secretary Marco Rubio, who said that actually people should be mindful because Greenland could be next on the list of priorities for the United States.
All right, this Monroe Doctrine, which claims that anything strategically vital in the Western Hemisphere should essentially fall under American primacy, but we also see that being a sticking point with its allies. Do you think that this is something feasible in this year 2026?
Well, this is the sticking point about the Monroe application of the Monroe Doctrine to today's reality is that the United States is a founding member of NATO and is a bedrock of the Western Alliance, and Greenland is autonomous territory managed by Denmark, who is another founding member of NATO. So here, the United States is entering into, at this point in time, rhetorical conflict with Denmark. So it's like a quarrel between allies in many respects. And that's what's extraordinary, unusual about it. And of course, if that rhetorics leads to something more, the actual United States intervention in Greenland, that would be a real threat to the unity of the Western Alliance, to the continuation of the Western Alliance in its form that we know right now.
Right, and speaking of NATO members, we do have some statement from various head of state as well as high-level foreign ministers as well. We do have the soundbite of the German foreign minister sounding off on this exact issue. Let's take a look.
As far as Greenland is concerned, I can only say that Greenland, like the Faroe Islands, is part of the Kingdom of Denmark. And since Denmark is a member of NATO, Greenland will in principle also have to be defended by NATO. And if there are further requirements to strengthen defense efforts with regard to Greenland, then we will have to discuss this together within the framework of the alliance.
Do you think this kind of rhetoric from the United States might weaken or cause any internal NATO conflicts? Does it weaken the alliance as a whole from the inside by normalizing the idea that perhaps allies can be threatened?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt about it. The United States is claiming a territory which is dependent on another ally. I mean, it's difficult to say whether, I mean, Greenland is not really per se a Danish territory, but it was set up as it was colonized by Denmark 300 years ago. Then it received an autonomous status, but its foreign and security policy is still dictated and managed by Denmark. So even giving this quirky nature of a status of Greenland, which, by the way, is not a member of the European Union, for example, even though Denmark is. Even given that, still this sounds like and has all the trappings of a potential conflict between two very close countries, two allies, which, by the way, Denmark is one of the most pro-American members of NATO and one of the most pro-American members of the European Union. In fact, until recently, Denmark wasn't part of the common security and defense policy of the European Union because it was claiming that it could undermine NATO and it could undermine the relationship with the United States. So Denmark is kind of one of his ideological bedrocks of what is transatlantic, what is pro-American within the Western European club, so to speak. And that doesn't seem to mean much to President Trump at all. It's like as if Denmark was like another faraway country with which United States didn't have particularly close links. So that fact seems to be to not play a particular role. If Donald Trump is consistent on that, that would mean that we are actually then entering a completely new era in transatlantic relations and in the in world order, so to speak, because the transatlantic relation will become looser, weaker, and the United States might be tempted to really, or actually is probably already doing it, is playing a very sort of a nation-state nationalistic policy whereby it does what it wants without any regard for alliances and close relations with Europeans.
Let's say Donald Trump keeps escalating this rhetoric or even operationally. And realistically, what can European leaders do? Talking about sovereignty and territorial integrity, but when push comes to shove, what are some of the options that they can pursue?
Well, they cannot do much militarily because they are militarily dependent on the United States, and so if we apply a pure force logic to that, then you might be right by saying that Europeans cannot really do that much. But the transatlantic relations are not just military based. Transatlantic relations have very strong economic dimension from which United States have benefited enormously. The European Union countries are still the first foreign investor in the United States. These are the countries with which the United States has the closest trade links. These are also the countries which, when the United States is in the hour of need, for example in Afghanistan, were the first one to come to America's aid. and to support the US operation in Afghanistan. Also, other NATO member states applied Article 5 of collective defense in the event of the terrorist attack in the United States in 2001. So we are good allies. Yeah, we are good allies, and we are also, Europeans are also the states, but like I said, the United States has very close economic relationship with. So, you know, entering into a conflict with other member of this alliance would lead to consequences well beyond the Danish-American relations.
Yeah, that's definitely too much to risk there. So what do you think is a more plausible scenario, like a kind of midway, maybe gray zone pathway here? Expanding basing demands, economic pressure. Do you see any way that America can get some sort of influence within the space that they sought, but without outright violating its sovereignty?
Well, I think that what President Trump is doing at the moment, also what Marco Rubio does, and some other people, like for example Katie Miller, who is the wife of Donald Trump's chief of staff, deputy chief of staff. She published this map with Greenland in Union Jack with the description that that's our next ambition or something like that. You know, really, the next steps here are that this is a rhetorical pressure for the Danish governments to bend and to offer some concessions. We can see a shade of that already, because the Prime Minister Frederiksen, she said recently that you know, these words of Donald Trump are unacceptable, that's enough, you know, let's stop doing it. But she also mentioned something like, well, we are open to discussions. We're open to discussions, so we'll stop threatening up and maybe we come to some kind of deal. Yeah? And so this is sort of a, you might see it in terms of negotiations. Yeah, so Donald Trump is pushing the boundary, is going into the territory that no other American president would have done before. And for now, the Europeans are sticking with the United States, but obviously Danish neighbors are sticking closer to Denmark than other Europeans, and Americans are watching. They are saying in 20 days we might have something new to announce on Greenland. This is what Donald Trump said on the Air Force Ones.
All right, that's actually very interesting. We do have that particular soundbite from Donald Trump. Let's take a look.
Well, I don't want to talk about Greenland. Let's talk about Venezuela, Russia, Ukraine, and we'll worry about Greenland in about 2 months. Let's talk about Greenland in 20 days.
On Venezuela, we talk so much about energy.
By the way, I will say this about Greenland. We need Greenland from a national security situation. It's so strategic. Right now, Greenland is covered with Russian and Chinese ships all over the place. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security, and Denmark is not going to be able to do it, I can tell you.
So even though he kept the timeline relatively vague, like 20 days more or less, the statement at the end, it does sound very strong. We need Greenland.
Yeah.
Repeated it several times, and it says that, well, Denmark can't get it done. What can we expect from Trump in the 20 days time frame?
It could be absolutely nothing. He might be just bluffing, which he's done many times before. This is not for the first time that the issue of the American takeover of Greenland is coming up, and maybe there will be an item of domestic agenda, another Epstein file being opened, which would just turn the attention somewhere else, and everybody would forget about Greenland at this point in time. But if not, then yes, you might expect that they may want to unveil some kind of a plan for for securing American presence on Greenland. Which, by the way, there is an American presence on Greenland already now. There is an American base which has been there since the end of the Second World War. It has performed an important role for the American intelligence, and they may want to talk about the expansion of that. And the Danish government is not necessarily negatively disposed to that. I think that the Danes would like to see more American presence on Greenland. But it's one thing to say that we want American presence, another thing is to say that we are ready to give up Denmark and surrender its sovereignty on behalf of the United States.
Right. Now, one thing that I've been observing is that Poland has been particularly quiet about this sounding off on whatever's going on over there. Do you think that this is more strategic discipline in order to avoid the public clash with DC?
Well, Poland is understandably cautious. Yeah? Poland is cautious because it is a good European. Yeah? Especially the current government wants to present its image to the world. We are good Europeans, so we stand together with Denmark. And for example, the Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski in December, before this issue blew up again, he was reasserting Poland's support for Danish territorial integrity with reference to Greenland. But then also Poland is a very close ally of the United States, and Poland's security rests on the understanding that these security ties would be substantial, material, and that the American presence on Polish territory would be growing. So Poland doesn't want to choose. The question is whether Poland would have this comfort for much longer. Because the way things are going now with the United States, with this new security strategy, with reasserting the Monroe Doctrine, it could be the United States would be just simply saying that we no longer are truly invested in European security, only in those countries which are close to us. So that could put a country like Poland in a position, you either choose Europe or you choose to work closely with the United States, which would be interpreted by other Europeans as disloyalty. But we are not there yet. For this point in time, Poland doesn't have to choose. And I think the government is desperate to maintain that situation in which it doesn't have to choose. But it's unclear whether that comfort will remain, whether it would be possible for much longer.
Right, brilliant. Thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on News in Depth.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning into this edition of News in Depth. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.